Hi, it's Martin from Martin's Engine Services. Today we have part 2 of the poorly 2010 Astra engine strip down, or it should be entitled I Got Bored on Boxing Day. Here is a view of the inside of the block. Actually, surprisingly, well, it's heavily oil contaminated, but it's not got a remarkable amount of baked on oil or congealed oil. These large chunks that you can see around the side here are actually factory silicon, which I think they've used an excessive amount of, possibly a relative of the guy who did the thermostat housing in part 1 of the video. Moving on to the crankshaft, it's actually surprising how good this has survived considering the oiling issues. There are some wear patterns on the crank and some scratches on the journals, but nothing extreme. The main bearings are actually in remarkably good condition, showing no signs of any serious wear or damage. Well, ignore the trunk out of that one. I had a bit of a fight with that one. It didn't want to leave. Shall we say I won that one? The big ends do have some signs of wear on, which is typical of the pattern caused by low oil pressure, where the upper shell has been contacting the crank on the compression stroke. All 4 of them are exhibiting the same signs of wear. The corresponding bearing in the cap is actually remarkably good, and some very slight marking in it, but much better than anticipated given this engine's problems. I do know these crankshafts are quite robust in these GM engines, as I actually build a few engines for the 1400 stock cars, and we use the earlier engine, circa around about to 2000, 2001, and the stock crankshaft and conrods do actually take quite happily RPM in excess of 8,000, and they have proven to be a very strong, reliable little engine. One other thing I must mention at this stage is that the smell has got no worse, and in fact it smells a cross between burnt cabbage and old damp socks. Delightful. The cylinder head, not in bad shape really, a little bit of carbon fouling here and there, but nothing serious, no signs of any significant burning oil. All the combustion chambers are of a similar colour, and no evidence at all of any blowing of the head gasket against the face. Similarly on the block, which I'll show later, the head gasket being a multi-layer steel affair, doesn't actually have any burn marks or signs of any failures on it, and all the sealing ring areas appear to be very clean on both sides, which does leave me to believe the problem is indeed a crack in the side of the cylinder head, although I have no way of verifying at this stage. The oil pump has actually survived remarkably well and has practically no wear whatsoever. The teeth of the inner rotor, or the gear of the inner rotor, has got no significant wear whatsoever, nor the only slight wear there is on the outside of the outer part of the gear is a couple of grooves around the outside, but the actual inner working face is fine, and the face of the pump in here, it's a little bit marked up, but nowhere near what you'd expect for the kind of contamination this engine's had through it. And likewise, the cover's almost untouched, with hardly any signs of any signs of any sort of contact at all, or scuffing or anything similar. You can see by the amount of sort of well, it's hard to describe exactly what it is. It's baked into the inner chamber of the oil pump, just how bad things really are. Oh, I must have a quick mention about these valve timing solenoids, the VVT solenoids. I did fail to show the image of the intake screen at the end. This one here is actually the intake one, and as you can see, there's some rubbish up the end of there, and likewise the exhaust. Now, moving on to I mentioned yesterday, the rear oil seal has the timing pickup in it. This component here bolts over the end of the crankshaft, and forms the sensor ring. The actual pickup here is incorporated into the rear oil seal carrier, and well, that's a pretty remarkable idea in its own right. You can see the sensor does actually bolt in and is replaceable. However, I attempted to access this to remove it earlier and it is almost impossible. Nice one, GM. I can't imagine that this item is exactly very cheap, and it's somewhat frustrating to have to replace all that just for a seal. Moving on to the top of the block, you see it's a bit grotty here and there, as it would be for its 14 years of use, but there's no signs of any problems around the ceiling areas. They're all very clean. Or dirty oil on there, and everything appears fine. There appears to be any cracks around the bolt holes or any other issues visible. The cylinder bores are in pretty good shape. No major wear lip on the top at all. In fact, there's hardly any notable wear. The pistons are showing some signs of oil burning, and it would appear that the oil control rings, as is quite often with these later modern engines, are somewhat worn, and on some pistons starting to stick into the actual piston. There is some skirt wear there, evident on both thrust sides, but nothing out of the ordinary, and all the conrods appear fine. Again, here's number 2 piston. As you can see, it's slightly clean around the edge where the oil's been coming up. Likewise, number 1 is not quite so bad. And just for the sake of showing it, here's number 3. Again, see the oil pattern on that one. And 4 is very, very similar. It's quite soft to the touch and is clearly oil. Now, moving on to the sump. I'll just get it up on the bench. Here we are. Now, this nice offensive item here, which absolutely stinks, you can see is heavily encrusted with something we used to call oil. The oil pickup itself is located in the bottom of this bolt-in plastic windage tray, and down in this little hole here, which is sort of just a cutout they cast in it, there is actually a sort of, can't really see, sort of cutouts on the bottom there, which locate into this cast boss here, and the oil enters through here. It's then drawn up through this pipe to the oil pump via this fantastically designed, and never going to be a problem, is it, plastic filter screen. Now you can see the actual oil that's actually on the outside that it was trying to pull up, and on the inside as well. This is some of the deposits that are inside it, and they literally feel like grit. The inside of this port here is absolutely choked, as you can see. That's what's inside it at the top. And subsequently, this I believe is another part of the low oil pressure concern. What a place to put that. It literally just sits in the hole and clips in like that. That's what you call a cheap design at its best. This is an oil level sensor. It's located in the sump here and runs out to this connector on the side there. Pretty horrible thing all round. And as I said again, I'm going to say it again, the smell is quite disgusting. It almost has a texture like someone's dropped a handful of sand in there. And as I said earlier, it's quite remarkable that the bearings and the crankshaft and the oil pump have survived in such remarkable condition. I was expecting to find an awful lot worse in the bottom of this engine, especially as it did have a rattle on start up and it did sound loose. One other item I noticed on the cylinder head, just turn the head over and show you. On the cam journals, there is quite interesting where on the intake side here, where the cam was badly worn, there is actually burnt on oil deposits on these two bearing surfaces where the camshaft was not actually touching at all, because obviously the angle of the valves pushes the cam away from that part of the bearing, passes it to this side of the journal in the head. This has happened on only the middle two. So that shows just how worn the camshaft actually was, in so much as it's been able to be pushed away from the journal, which obviously was allowing oil pressure to escape. This must have been happening for quite some considerable time, given the fact that the carbon, or oily carbon deposits, have actually built up on the cylinder head. Well, all I can say is this really is as horrible as it actually looks. And none of these parts will be going back on a serviceable engine in the future. You simply wouldn't trust anything. Although the crankshaft would be probably even survive just being polished, but I can't imagine there's any great demand for a 14-year-old or nearly 15-year-old Astra crankshaft these days. Likewise, the connecting rods. All usable components from this engine will be kept, of course, as I always do, and all the aluminium and steel components will be dismantled fully for recycling wherever possible. Likewise, all the electrical components will be recycled in accordance with disposal regulations rather than just throwing in the bin. I like to recycle as many components as possible, and I think this does offset somewhat the environmental disaster that we see before us. Just joking. Anyhow, hope you enjoyed this follow-up video on this delightful engine, and hopefully I'll get something else to tear apart fairly soon, but thanks for watching, and please like and subscribe. Bye for now.